Welcome to this edition of Precept Steps, where we are working through the Torah portions in an attempt to fulfill this verse in Psalm 119, to keep your precepts diligently. And if we don't know your precepts, then we can't keep them. So this is our endeavor to learn them. This Torah portion, or the Parshat, it means Torah portion, is Mattot, Masei, and it means tribes and journeys. This is a double Torah portion, so it covers quite a lot of information that we're going to, frankly, go through very quickly. Check out the Hebrew there. We see that both of these words, let me get my pointer, my pen. We'll see that both of these begin with a mem. There is a dot in the middle of the first M that has to do with what vowel comes next. And let's pick out a couple other things. What letter is this? This is a somic, which would explain the connection with the S there in the center of the word. Got a tav here at the end. Just trying to pick out the ones that are the most easily recognized. And that tav is referring here. Sorry, I made a little detour. To the T sound. Right? And as I said, we're covering Numbers chapter 30 through 36. Double Torah portion. So let's dive in. Numbers chapter 30 gives us some instructions about vows and obligations. And vows in a general sense, you hear people talk about taking their wedding vows. It's basically a promise. Most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time when the Bible is talking about vows, they are talking about promises that people make to God. That if God will help them with this and so in situation, or maybe just because I love you, Yahweh, I vow to give you this. Yahweh takes these very seriously. He spends a whole chapter talking about if you take a vow and what your obligation is concerning that vow. And we kind of get the seriousness of it when we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verse 5, where it says, it is better not to vow than to make a vow and not fulfill it. And there are other verses in the Bible that make reference to this. Fulfilling a vow that you make to God is incredibly important, but also vows you make to other people are very important, and God expects you to keep that obligation. So let's read chapter 30, verses 7 through 9. And this is about if a woman makes a vow. If a woman, having made vows or rashly committed herself to an obligation, and she gets married, okay, so she's made this vow while still in her father's house, and her father has not objected to it. That's earlier in the chapter. Then that vow remains upon her. But if she gets married and her husband hears about this vow, but holds his peace, he doesn't say anything, with her on the day he learns of it, then her vows and obligations she has bound herself will stand, and she is responsible for them. But, and this is a huge but for what we're going to talk about in just a moment, but if her husband expresses his disapproval on the day he hears it, he will void the vow which is on her and the obligation to which she has bound herself, and Adonai, Yahweh, will forgive her. All right, so why is this important to us? In our culture, we don't really do vows. I mean, we do marriage vows and we make promises. But it's not actually common in our culture for people to make a lot of vows. And yet we do. We bind ourselves. A vow is to bind yourself to something. We bind ourselves, especially before we meet Yeshua, before we're saved. Many people will bind themselves to other things, addictions. The list could go on forever. Here's the important concept. When you become part of the kingdom, when you accept Yeshua as your Savior, and you become part of that kingdom, it describes you as being the bride of Christ. And while vows are binding and obligations are binding, all vows and obligations are binding. You see, when you become part of the bride of Christ, when you become part of the bride of Yeshua, then Yeshua, under this law, has the authority to make null and void all of your previous vows and obligations, all the things that you have tied yourself to in this world. Yeshua, as your husband, is able to nullify all of those vows and release you from their power. And that is huge. In chapter 31, Israel goes to war. Now, if you remember, they've already fought the giants. They've already seen war. But this time they're going to fight against Midian at the direction of Yahweh. Numbers 31:2 says, on behalf of the people of Israel, and he's speaking to Moses, on behalf of the people of Israel, take vengeance on Midian, or the people of Midian, the Midianim. Why? Well, if you'll remember, they had a plot hatched by Balaam, the guy with the talking donkey, to tempt Israel, to lure them into a trap, to worship the gods of Midian. God says, no, not having it. You go take vengeance on Midian. Now, if you've been listening to the adult study, you will know that we talk a lot about vengeance, that when someone wrongs us, that we wait for God to take vengeance. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, I will repay. But this is at God's direction. So he is taking vengeance through the people of Israel on the people of Midian. And so they were successful in this campaign. And it says they killed the kings of Midian. And who else did they kill? You bet they did. They killed Balaam, the son of Beor, the prophet who taught King Balak to deceive them. They killed him with the sword. When they came back from the battle, Moshe said to them, pitch your tents outside the camp for 7 days. Whoever has killed a person or touched the corpse of someone slain, so that's pretty much all of them, I imagine, purify yourselves on the 3rd and 7th day, you and your captives. All right. So what's Moses talking about here? What's he referring to? You should know the answer to this question. We studied it a couple of Torah portions ago. I'm going to give you a second to think about it. What is he talking about here? He is talking about the purification, the waters of purification that they made from the sacrifice of the red heifer. You see, this all ties together. Once you start studying through this, you start to see some things. This is referring back to that sacrifice of the red heifer and the making of the waters of purification. And the instructions were given at that time that when you have touched a dead person, that in order to come into the camp and be in the presence of the tabernacle, see, it's all about being in the presence of God. You have to be purified. You have to be purified on the 3rd day and again on the 7th day, and then you can come into the camp. Now, something else interesting happens in chapter 31, and that is that the commanders come to Moshe and they say, guess what, Moshe? We have counted our men who have come back from battle. And you're not going to believe this, but we didn't lose a single man. Not a single man of Israel was killed in this battle. I think that's pretty amazing. In chapter 32, we have the account of the tribes of Reuben and Gad approaching Moshe and asking if they can settle in the land that they have already conquered. In 32 verse 5, it says, if you regard us favorably, let this land be given to your servants as their possession, and don't have us cross the Jordan or the Jordan River. So we see that Reuben and Gad are willing to settle for less than what Yahweh promised. Was it a good land? Yeah, it's pretty good. And they saw that it was good for cattle and for flocks, and they had much livestock, it says. Well, Moshe wasn't in favor of this idea. In fact, he was a little irritated. He's like, what do you mean you don't want to go into the promised land? Haven't we been down this road before? I mean, we've been to the border of the promised land before, and you guys saw the giants and were afraid and didn't want to go in. And now you're telling me you don't want to go in again? You're going to cause all of Israel to fail. Gad and Reuben made a counteroffer. They say, we get it. Okay, we understand your objection here, Moshe. How about if we do this? We ourselves will be armed and ready for action to march at the head of the people of Israel until we have brought them to their place. We're willing to go in, Moses. We just don't want to live there. We want to live over here. How often do we settle for less than God's best? How often do we settle to live on the fringe of the promise? We're almost there. All we got to do is cross the Jordan. And maybe, Reuben and Gad were both in the south camp along with Simeon. And the south camp suffered heavy losses. Heavy losses. We talked about that last week. And maybe they were just tired. Maybe they'd seen enough people die. All supposition. But for whatever reason, they were willing to settle for less than God's best. Because they made a promise to fulfill their vow that they made to see the people across, to see the rest of the tribes across the Jordan and settled in the promised land. God allowed it. Just because God allows something does not necessarily mean that it is his best for us. And we do well to keep that in mind. In Numbers chapter 33 and 34, there is a few things that go on. In Numbers 33, most of it is spent with recounting the journey. So this is Moshe is just going through a quick review of all the places they have been, all the places they have camped since they left Egypt. Until you get down to verse 55, and then Yahweh talks a little bit about what he expects them to do when they cross the Jordan and go into the promised land. How he expects them to handle things there. And he basically expects them to remove all traces of idol worship from the land of Canaan and drive the inhabitants out, either kill them or make them move. And in verse 55 we read, but if you don't drive out the inhabitants of the land from in front of you, then those you allow to remain will become like thorns in your eyes and stings in your sides. They will harass you in the land where you are living. So if you can imagine these giant thorns scratching your eye or sticking you in the side, God warns the people of Israel, if you let these people stay, I know you want to be merciful, I know you want to be kind, but bad things are going to happen if you allow them to stay. And so he warns them. It's a solemn warning. And in chapter 34, God outlines for them exactly where their boundaries are, what land they can have and what land they cannot have. All important things. In chapter 35, God gives them some more instruction about how they're to set up the land in Canaan, in the promised land. And one of the things he wants them to do is to set up some special cities. First set of special cities is for the Levites. Now, if you'll remember, the Levites are consecrated to God. He says, they are mine, and I am their inheritance. And so they are not assigned land. How do they make a living if they don't have land? Through the tithes and the offerings of the people. But they are still people, and they need a place to lay their head at night, and they need shelter in a storm. They need some place to live. So he says, I want you to designate them cities. And these cities also included the surrounding land. They were to draw a line out 3,000 feet from the wall of the city and draw a circle around it, and that land was also to belong to the Levites. And they could use this land to pasture their flocks, grow gardens, etc. Okay. And they were to make 48 cities for the Levites scattered throughout the tribes of Israel. Why? Why did God do this? It's brilliant. What is the Levite's job? The Levite's job is to teach the people, clean from unclean, how to obey God's laws, be a judge if someone breaks God's laws as to what should be done, or if they actually broke a law. Right? So scattering them throughout the cities or throughout the tribes is important because there's someone close by all the time to remind the people of Yahweh's ways, of how he wants things done, of his law, and to help them carry out judgments and justice based on those laws. Right? So this is actually quite brilliant. Now, there's 48 of these Levitical cities. And then Yahweh says, I want you to take 6 of them, scatter them through the tribes, and I want you to make them cities of refuge. Well, what's a city of refuge? Let's read. You are to designate for yourselves cities that will be cities of refuge for you, to which anyone who kills someone by mistake can flee. Now, in this culture, there were things called blood avengers or avengers of blood. So when someone was killed and it was obvious what had happened, maybe even the person witnessed it, that avenger of blood could take the other person's life. However, in the circumstance where it was an accident, the person who killed the other person didn't mean to. It was something happened, and he did kill another person, but it was not his intention, obviously not his intention to kill that other person. Then he could flee to the city of refuge. And if he made it there, the avenger of blood could not take vengeance, could not kill him. And he was to remain in that city until there was a changing of the high priest. So if you went there when the high priest was kind of young, you might be there 40 or 50 years. Here's the thing about the city of refuge. The city of refuge was not for the innocent. People who were truly innocent would stand their ground, would say, I need a judgment. I need to stand trial. I didn't do this. All right. So the cities of refuge are not for the innocent. These people were guilty of bloodshed. They had killed another person, but they didn't mean to. It was a mistake. So they are guilty, but they seek, and Yahweh says they deserve mercy. So the city of refuge are for the guilty who seek mercy. Beautiful picture of how people can come to Yeshua, guilty of sin, and find mercy. And so we reach the end of the book of Numbers. And next Torah portion, next Sabbath, we will begin working through the book of Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Torah portions, the fifth book of the Pentateuch, and the last book. So Deuteronomy will take us all the way to Sukkot. I always get excited when we start Deuteronomy because that means Sukkot is just around the corner. But all that aside, we have finished the book of Numbers, and as per tradition, we will say the following together. Hazak, Kazak, V'nitz Kazek, which means be strong, and let us be strengthened.